Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
Today we're doing a deep dive into something that fundamentally alters how you process reality.
Yeah, we are going to take apart the invisible architecture of your own beliefs, the way you consume news, how you perceive scientific authority.
And to do this, we're using a remarkably detailed book called Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes and Eric M. Conway.
But let me be perfectly clear right out of the gate. This is not a book review.
Right. We are not here to just summarize chapters.
No, we're using this meticulously researched text as an entry point. It's a lens to analyze a massive, invisible system operating all around you right now.
That structural perspective is vital. Our mission today is a systems-level institutional analysis.
Exactly. We're not just looking at a few bad actors in history.
We are examining how a specific, repeatable strategy was designed, how it was incentivized, and how it has been deployed over decades to shape public perception.
And the primary system we're examining today is manufactured uncertainty as an institutional strategy.
Which is a phrase that sounds almost like an oxymoron.
It does, manufactured uncertainty, but it's actually a brilliant, if destructive, mechanism. How would you define that system for the listener?
Well, it is the highly organized use of scientific prestige, media norms, and political ideology to delay government regulation.
Delay being the operative word there.
Absolutely. It's a system that works by reframing established, factual scientific findings as an unresolved debate.
So when you see a consensus of thousands of scientists suddenly opposed by a handful of vocal skeptics, you aren't watching a genuine scientific dispute.
No, you're watching a machine operating exactly as it was designed to.
And understanding how that machinery operates is just crucial for anyone trying to navigate our modern information landscape without being manipulated.
To understand the blueprint of this machine, we actually have to travel back to the moment of its creation.
December 1953.
Right.
I want you, the listener, to really picture this scene. It's New York City, the Plaza Hotel.
The French Renaissance chateau-style building right on Central Park.
Yeah, it's the height of post-war American prosperity. And gathered together in a private room are the presidents of America's largest tobacco companies.
You've got American Tobacco, Philip Morris, U.S. Tobacco, Benson and Hedges.
Along with the CEOs of R.J. Reynolds and Brown and Williamson, these are men who run empires.
And smoking in 1953 wasn't just a habit, it was a cultural pillar. Doctors smoked in advertisements.
But on this particular winter day, these titans of industry are in a state of absolute existential panic.
And the panic was entirely justified by the data. Independent scientific researchers had just started publishing devastating findings linking cigarette smoking to lung cancer.
Right. Specifically, there was this landmark study by researchers Ernst Winder and Everett Scram.
They painted cigarette tar on the backs of mice, and the mice developed massive tumors.
It was visual, it was visceral, and the public was starting to wake up.
One of the internal industry memos from that era noted that their salesmen were frantically alarmed by the news.
Because popular magazines like Reader's Digest were running articles with titles like Cancer by the Carton.
Cancer by the carton. That is a PR nightmare of apocalyptic proportions for a tobacco executive.
It was a threat to one of the most profitable business models ever conceived. So the executives didn't just meet with each other at the Plaza Hotel to commiserate.
No, they brought in a specialist. They met with a man named John Hill.
The founder and CEO of one of America's largest and most sophisticated public relations firms, Hill and Knowlton.
And John Hill wasn't, a P.T. Barnum-style huckster throwing parades.
Right. He was a pioneer of modern corporate public relations. Someone who understood that to manipulate the public, you don't use flashy stunts.
You use the appearance of sober, objective authority.
This is the moment the blueprint is drawn. Because at this meeting, Hill and the tobacco executives came to a foundational, terrifying realization.
They looked at the Winder and Graham mouse study, they looked at their own internal chemistry reports, and they realized they could not explicitly prove that tobacco was safe.
The science simply wasn't on their side.
If they came out and said smoking is harmless, the independent scientists would destroy them with data.
So instead of fighting the science with facts, John Hill proposed they fight the science with doubt.
This is the birth of the tobacco strategy.
And the genius of the strategy lies in its subtlety.
There is an infamous tobacco industry memo from 1969 written by a Brown and Williamson executive that perfectly encapsulates what John Hill set in motion.
What does it say?
The memo states, and this is verbatim, "Doubt is our product. since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public.
I always get chills reading that line, doubt is our product. They weren't just selling cigarettes anymore.
No, they were actively manufacturing and distributing uncertainty.
And we have to look at the mechanics of how they manufactured it, because they didn't just stand at a podium and yell that the independent scientists were wrong.
That's too transparent. Instead, they funded distracting decoy research.
They created an organization called the Tobacco Industry Research Committee.
And they poured millions of dollars into studying everything under the sun that might cause cancer.
Except tobacco.
Exactly.
What kind of decoy research are we talking about here?
They funded massive grants to study the genetic causes of cancer. They funded research into dietary links to cardiovascular diseases,
Viral causes of cell mutation, occupational hazards.
nervous tension, environmental pollution.
Wait, but all of those things are legitimate fields of scientific study, right?
That-
Genetics and pollution do play a role in cancer.
That is exactly what made the strategy so effective. It was legitimate science.
They hired credentialed researchers to do real lab work.
But the purpose of the funding was strategic misdirection. It was a magician's sleight of hand.
By loudly funding and heavily publicizing research into the genetic or viral causes of cancer, the tobacco industry could quietly suggest to the public and to lawmakers that the link between smoking and cancer was just one of many unproven theories.
They created a smokescreen of legitimate data to hide the most deadly variable.
I think of it like this. Imagine your house is burning down because a guy in your living room is actively spraying a flamethrower at the walls.
Right.
And the guy with the flamethrower pays a team of brilliant independent scientists to aggressively study how sometimes faulty electrical wiring can cause house fires.
Or how a lightning strike can ignite a roof.
Yeah, and the scientists are doing real math on lightning strikes, and it's all true, but it's meant to completely distract you from the guy holding the flamethrower.
And the decoy research was coupled with the mastery of the disingenuous question.
The industry's PR arms would systematically feed questions to journalists.
Questions that sound incredibly reasonable to a layperson, but whose answers were already well understood by the scientific community.
Give me an example of one of those questions. What would they ask the press?
They would publicly ask things like, if smoking causes lung cancer, why do cancer rates vary between different cities that have the exact same smoking rates?
Or they would ask, why is the recent sudden rise in lung cancer greatest in men, even though the statistical rise in cigarette use over the last 20 years was actually greatest in women?
And if you're reading that in a newspaper in 1960, you're thinking,
Wow, those are gaping holes in the smoking theory. The scientists must not know what they're talking about.
which is the intended psychological effect.
But the medical researchers already knew the answers to those questions.
Cancer rates vary between cities because smoking isn't the only cause of cancer. A city with heavy industrial smog and heavy smoking will have more cancer than a rural town with heavy smoking.
As for the gender disparity, the scientists knew that lung cancer has a latency period of 2 to 3 decades.
Men had been heavily smoking since World War I, whereas smoking only became socially acceptable for large numbers of women around World War II.
The cancer rates in women simply hadn't caught up yet because the latency period hadn't elapsed.
The tobacco industry knew these answers.
But by repeatedly posing the questions to journalists as if they were unresolved mysteries, they created the illusion of an ongoing, fierce scientific debate.
To pull off an illusion of that magnitude, though, you need more than just PR guys in suits.
You need magicians who look the part. You need a legitimate face for the doubt.
This brings us to a really uncomfortable part of the history.
The system relied on a small, elite network of men who became the reusable legitimacy infrastructure for this entire strategy.
We are talking about highly credentialed, famous scientists operating as credibility brokers.
Two of the main architects of this system were Fred Seitz and S. Fred Singer.
Who were these men? Because they weren't just random guys off the street.
They were absolute titans of Cold War American science. Fred Seitz was a prominent solid-state physicist. He was so brilliant that he actually helped build the atomic bomb during World War II.
He later became the president of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences.
And the president of Rockefeller University. He was at the absolute pinnacle of the American scientific establishment.
And S. Fred Singer was literally a rocket scientist. He was a leading figure in developing early Earth observation satellites.
He worked on mine design for the Navy during the war, and he served as the first director of the National Weather Satellite Service.
These were not fringe quacks or pseudoscientists. They are deeply connected, highly respected figures who had the ear of admirals, generals, and presidents.
They had immense social capital. But I'm looking at their resumes. Solid-state physics, rocketry, mine design.
They weren't medical doctors.
They weren't epidemiologists. They weren't oncologists. How does a rocket scientist end up being the public face of tobacco safety?
By exploiting the halo effect of their prestige.
In the post-World War II era, physicists who worked on the Manhattan Project or the space race were viewed by the American public almost as demigods.
They had won the war. They were pushing humanity into the cosmos.
Seitz and Singer used the prestige of their past achievements in physics to present themselves as ultimate authorities on entirely different, unrelated fields of biology and public health.
More importantly, they understood how to exploit the fundamental nature of scientific inquiry.
They took highly technical, normal scientific uncertainty and translated it into public doubt.
Explain that gap to me. The difference between normal scientific uncertainty and the doubt they were selling.
Well, science is an iterative process of discovery. It is never 100% settled in the sense of absolute dogmatic finality, because scientists are always asking the next, more granular question.
There's always uncertainty within science.
Exactly. For example, by the 1960s, scientists knew for a fact that smoking caused cancer. The epidemiological data was overwhelming.
But researchers might still be intensely debating the exact microscopic mechanism of how a specific chemical in the tar interacts with the DNA of a specific lung cell to cause a mutation.
And what Seitz, Singer, and the PL firms did was exploit the crucial gap between that normal uncertainty within science and uncertainty about whether we know anything at all.
They would take a legitimate, highly technical debate over the precise mechanism of cell mutation, write an op-ed about it, and sell it to the public as a debate over whether smoking is actually harmful.
That is such a vital distinction for you to keep in mind as a listener. They took the scientific method, which requires caution, exactitude, and an admission of what is not yet known, and weaponized it against the scientists.
But looking at Seitz and Singer, it begs a massive question. Why?
Yeah, why would brilliant men who helped defeat fascism in World War II, men who clearly understood the scientific method better than almost anyone on Earth, sell doubt that would ultimately cost millions of lives?
It couldn't just be about a corporate consulting paycheck, could it?
The financial incentives were there, of course, but the primary engine driving these specific scientists was deeply ideological.
We have to view them through the lens of the Cold War.
Both Seitz and Singer were deeply hawkish, fiercely anti-communist Cold Warriors.
They had spent their entire formative careers building literal weapons to defend the United States against the Soviet threat.
Their worldview was entirely shaped by the battle between Western capitalism and Soviet communism.
They believed passionately, almost zealously, in laissez-faire capitalism and the absolute necessity of free, unfettered markets.
How does that leap from fighting the Soviets to fighting cancer researchers?
To them, government regulation was the enemy.
Whether the government was telling the tobacco industry what it could sell, or telling power plants they had to install scrubbers to prevent acid rain, or telling chemical companies they couldn't produce certain aerosols.
Seitz and Singer viewed every single regulation as the first step on a slippery slope to socialism.
They viewed environmentalists and public health advocates with extreme suspicion.
Within these conservative ideological circles, environmentalists were frequently referred to as watermelons.
Watermelon.
Green on the outside, but red meaning communist on the inside.
Wow.
They believed that environmentalism was just a Trojan horse for socialists who wanted to control the American economy.
So they didn't see themselves as corporate shills protecting a cancer-causing product. In their own minds, they were defending the American economic order and individual liberty against a creeping, stealthy communism.
To them, regulating the free market was a fundamental threat to freedom itself.
It is a staggering rationalization. They were willing to sacrifice public health to actively fight factual, peer-reviewed evidence because they were fighting a proxy war against the ghost of communism.
That's the ideological engine.
But we also have to look at the corporate and political engine, because this system requires massive funding to operate.
The incentives for industry to fund these ideological scientists are just massive, aren't they?
The corporate motivation is entirely about the bottom line. For an industry, whether it's tobacco in the 50s or fossil fuels today, avoiding regulation, avoiding liability lawsuits, and avoiding the costs associated with cleaning up their product is the ultimate goal.
And here's the crucial metric for the system. They don't even need to win the debate permanently.
Even partial delay is a massive victory.
If the tobacco strategy can stall a federal regulation for a decade, that industry saves billions of dollars in compliance costs and continues to reap billions in revenue.
Delay is just as lucrative as absolute victory.
Political actors, similarly, benefit heavily from this manufactured uncertainty.
Politicians are generally incentivized to postpone making hard, economically painful choices that might anger donors or voters.
When a credibility broker hands a politician a report saying the science isn't settled, it gives that politician the perfect excuse to do nothing,
More research is needed becomes the politician's favorite phrase.
because it kicks the difficult decision down the road, usually past the next election cycle.
The system rewards delay at every single level. But to achieve that delay, they needed a delivery mechanism.
They needed a way to get this manufactured doubt into the living rooms of the American public.
And this is where the system brilliantly and devastatingly exploited the media. They weaponized the journalistic system of balance.
The media balance trap is arguably the most important mechanism in the entire strategy.
For decades, particularly driven by the history of the fairness doctrine in American broadcasting, journalists were trained with a very specific ethic. You must present both sides of a controversial issue of public concern.
And as a listener, that sounds perfectly democratic, right? Give equal weight to opposing views. It's the foundation of a fair debate.
It sounds democratic, and it is entirely appropriate in the realm of politics, where opinions and values are the currency. If you are debating tax policy, there are multiple valid perspectives.
But applying the two-party political framework to empirical science is a fundamental error.
In science, once a matter is resolved through rigorous peer review, independent verification, and broad consensus, there are no longer two equal opposing sides.
There's simply accepted scientific knowledge and those who refuse to accept it.
You wouldn't demand that a news report on the orbit of the planets give equal time to a flat earther in the name of balance.
But the media inherently rewards controversy, conflict, and debate. Two people arguing on a split screen makes for much more engaging television than a single scientist reading a dry consensus report.
So these credibility brokers, these few Cold War physicists, realized they didn't need to win over the scientific community. They just needed to hack the media's rules.
By demanding equal time for their fringe, industry-funded views, Seitz, Singer, and a few others created what the authors of the book call a scientific Potemkin village.
For the listener, a Potemkin village comes from the story of Grigory Potemkin, who supposedly built fake, beautiful storefronts in a village to impress the Russian Empress Catherine the Great when she visited.
It looks like a real town from the road, but behind the facade, there's nothing there.
That is exactly what they built in the media. You'd open a major newspaper or turn on the evening news, and you'd see a report on climate or tobacco.
The journalist, trying to be fair, would juxtapose the entire scientific community representing thousands of active researchers, decades of field work, and mountains of peer-reviewed data against one retired solid-state physicist funded by an industry think tank.
And to you, the consumer of the news sitting on your couch, it looked like a 50-50 split.
The evidentiary weight was completely asymmetric, but the media presentation was perfectly balanced.
That illusion of balance is what paralyzes public action.
If the experts can't even agree among themselves, the public thinks, how can we possibly pass sweeping laws that will cost jobs, raise taxes, or change our lifestyle?
The system of manufactured uncertainty exploits our innate civic desire for fairness and our lack of specialized scientific knowledge.
It turns the media into an unwitting but highly effective accomplice in delaying accountability.
We've talked about the blueprint, the ideology of the men who built it, and the media systems they exploited. But I want to bring this down to the human level.
Because looking at systems can sometimes feel abstract.
The toll this machinery takes isn't just about delayed legislation. It destroys reputations. It shatters lives.
To really understand the systemic toll, we have to talk about the harrowing story of an atmospheric scientist named Ben Santer.
The experience of Ben Santer perfectly anchors our analysis because it shows the extreme aggression of the system when it targets an individual whose findings threaten the delay strategy.
By all accounts, Ben Santer is a thoroughly moderate, quiet, self-effacing scientist. He wasn't a political activist.
In the mid-1990s, he was working at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, dedicating his life to analyzing climate models.
Because of his brilliance in the field, he was selected as a key author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC.
Which is the world's leading consensus-driven authority on climate issues.
Let's talk about the specific science Santer was working on, because it is fascinating and it explains why he became such a massive target. It's a technique called fingerprinting.
In the early 90s, the global warming skeptics, often guided by the same think tanks employing Seitz and Singer, had shifted their argument.
They couldn't deny the Earth was warming anymore. The thermometer data was too obvious. So they argued that the warming was just natural variation.
They claimed it was a natural cycle, or perhaps the sun was simply burning a little hotter.
Santer and his colleagues decided to test that claim by looking for the specific fingerprints of human activity in the atmosphere.
Physics dictates that if the sun were simply getting hotter and causing the warming, the heat would penetrate from the top down.
Both the lower atmosphere, the troposphere, where we live and where weather happens, and the upper atmosphere, the stratosphere, which contains the ozone layer, would warm up simultaneously.
Okay, so a hotter sun means the whole atmospheric blanket gets warmer. Makes sense.
But if greenhouse gases from human activity, like burning coal and oil, were trapping heat near the Earth's surface, you would expect a completely different structural fingerprint.
The greenhouse gases would act like a reflective barrier at the bottom of the atmosphere.
You would expect the troposphere, the bottom layer, to trap the heat and warm up, while the stratosphere, the top layer above the greenhouse gases, would be starved of that reflected heat and would actually cool down.
Ben Santer's painstakingly reviewed data proved exactly that.
The models matched the satellite and weather balloon observations perfectly. The troposphere was warming and the stratosphere was cooling.
The boundary between them was actually shifting outward.
It was the smoking gun. It proved mathematically that the warming was not a natural solar cycle. The human impact was now undeniable.
And as a result, Santer was the lead author of Chapter 8 of the 1995 IPCC report, which included the historic, consensus-approved statement that the balance of evidence suggested a discernible human influence on global climate.
So Ben Santer does exactly what a brilliant scientist should do. He solves a massive, incredibly complex puzzle.
He writes the chapter detailing these findings, and the global scientific community agrees with him.
What is his reward for this breakthrough?
He is targeted for absolute professional destruction. The credibility brokers we mentioned earlier, Fred Seitz and Fred Singer, launch a brutal, coordinated attack on him.
It was a character assassination designed to look like a scientific critique.
Seitz and Singer published blistering op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. They accused Santer of scientific cleansing.
A deeply offensive term clearly meant to evoke ethnic cleansing, which was happening in the Balkans at the time.
They claimed Santer had secretly doctored the IPCC documents.
They alleged he altered Chapter 8 after it was approved by the participating scientists in order to deceive policymakers and the public into believing the science was more settled than it was.
They wrote letters to his employers at the Department of Energy trying to get him fired.
They distributed specialized reports with titles like doctoring the documents directly to members of Congress and to journalists.
Here is the dark, twisted irony of the entire attack. It is the perfect example of how the system operates. The system of manufactured uncertainty leveraged the very norms of good science against him.
Let's clarify this for the listener. Did Ben Santer alter the text of Chapter 8 after the initial draft was presented?
Yes, he did.
Why? Because of peer review.
Exactly, and this is where institutional blind spots become weaponized. Peer review is the foundational ethic of the scientific method. Every scientific claim must endure critical scrutiny by other experts before it is accepted.
Authors are required to take reviewers' comments seriously, to fix mistakes, to clarify clunky arguments, and to ensure the final text reflects the consensus of the group.
The IPCC has a tremendously rigorous, almost agonizing peer review process involving hundreds of experts and government representatives from around the world.
At the final meeting in Madrid, the scientists debated the language for days.
Santer made changes to Chapter 8 in response to those peer review comments, and the consensus reached in Madrid. He did exactly what good science and the strict rules of the IPCC demanded.
But Seitz and Singer, who had spent decades in the scientific establishment and knew full well how peer review works, cynically spun this standard, required scientific practice to the public as evidence of a sinister cover-up and fraud.
They used his strict adherence to scientific integrity as a reputational attack surface.
And despite Santer defending himself, despite the chairman of the IPCC writing open letters affirming that Santer followed all procedures perfectly, despite dozens of scientists writing to the Wall Street Journal backing him up the mudslide.
The Wall Street Journal published only fragments of the defense, but gave the attackers massive amounts of space to repeat the lies.
The human toll on Santer was immense. He spent years defending his integrity instead of doing new research.
He received death threats. A dead rat was left on his doorstep. His marriage fell apart under the immense stress.
And the systemic toll was even worse than the personal toll. This manufactured controversy achieved its exact goal, creating profound public and political confusion.
The attack on Santer normalized the experts' disagree framing regarding climate change in the public consciousness, leading to massive regulatory delays despite overwhelmingly strong, fingerprint-backed scientific evidence.
You can see the ultimate outcome of this confusion manifesting at the very highest levels of government.
This brings us to the Antonin Scalia anecdote, which just blew my mind when I read it.
We are in the Supreme Court of the United States. The year is 2006.
The case is Massachusetts v. EPA, a landmark case about whether the Environmental Protection Agency has the authority to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant.
Justice Scalia, one of the most powerful legal minds in the country, is arguing with the lawyer for Massachusetts about the science.
At one point in the oral arguments, Scalia refers to the stratosphere when he meant the troposphere.
The lawyer for Massachusetts respectfully corrects him, saying, "Respectfully, Your Honor, it is not the stratosphere. It's the troposphere."
And Justice Scalia replied, "On the record, troposphere, whatever. I told you before, I'm not a scientist. That's why I don't want to deal with global warming."
That, quote, troposphere, whatever, perfectly encapsulates the final victory of the doubt merchants.
It is the institutionalization of willful ignorance.
It is born from a feeling of being exhausted and overwhelmed by decades of manufactured technical debate.
When the highest judges in the land dismiss the specific scientific mechanisms as too confusing to even deal with, the system of delay has won. The public and the policymakers just throw their hands up.
To really see how the mechanics of this victory sustain themselves over time, we need to map out the feedback loops that this strategy creates.
There are two incredibly vicious cycles at play here, and as a listener, once you see these loops, you're going to recognize them everywhere in the news, on social media, and in political debates.
Let's trace the first one, the delay loop.
The delay loop is the economic engine of the system.
It starts with the initial injection of doubt messaging into the media by credibility brokers like Sites or Singer.
This creates a perceived controversy in the public mind.
Because the public is confused and divided, politicians feel no immense pressure to act, which results in political delay.
That delay means the polluting or harmful activity continues unchecked. This results in continued harm to public health or the environment.
But crucially, it results in continued massive profits for the industry in question.
A portion of those sustained profits is then funneled back as sustained funding for the think tanks and PR firms.
Those well-funded organizations then amplify the doubtmongers even further, leading to even deeper perceived controversy.
It is a self-sustaining cycle of paralysis, funded by the very harm it allows to continue.
And running right alongside that economic cycle is a psychological one, the intimidation loop.
This starts with the attack campaigns, like the brutal character assassination of Ben Santer.
When other scientists watching from the sidelines see what happened to Santer, the threats to his career, his mental health, his family, the dead rat on his porch, it leads directly to researcher intimidation.
Scientists are generally trained to be quiet, objective researchers in labs. They're not trained to be public brawlers in the media.
So when they see the cost of speaking up, they put their heads down.
You get fewer public-facing scientists willing to speak to the media, willing to write op-eds, or willing to advise lawmakers.
With fewer actual experts explaining the science to the public, public understanding weakens even further.
And a public with a weak understanding of the science is a public where it is infinitely easier for the PR firms to push doubt messaging. Round and round it goes.
Which brings us to a crucial analytical point, the resilience of this strategy. Why does this system persist for decades?
Why hasn't society or the scientific community dismantled it?
The first reason is the sheer asymmetry of effort. It is incredibly inexpensive to manufacture doubt.
A think tank can hire a writer to draft a misleading op-ed in an afternoon for a few $100s. They can publish it on a blog or feed it to a friendly news network instantly.
But it is astronomically costly and time-consuming for scientists to rebut that lie.
I think about this all the time. A scientist can't just go on television and yell, "You're wrong."
To properly scientifically rebut a claim, even a ridiculous one they have, to gather data, run complex computer models, undergo rigorous peer review, and publish a paper in a journal.
It takes years and millions of dollars of research funding just to prove that a lie told in a single sentence is false.
There's an internet adage for this. The amount of energy needed to refute nonsense is an order of magnitude bigger than the energy needed to produce it.
A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes.
Furthermore, we have to recognize the institutional blind spots of science itself. Scientific institutions are fundamentally ill-equipped for public relations warfare.
As you noted, scientists are trained to be cautious, objective, and collaborative. They are deeply wary of taking individual credit or stepping into the political spotlight.
The institutions themselves, the universities, the government laboratories, the scientific societies, lack the incentives or the rapid response mechanisms to sanction strategic bad faith quickly.
They operate under the assumption that everyone in the debate is playing by the rules of honest scientific inquiry.
When faced with actors operating in bad faith, who view the debate not as a quest for objective truth, but as a battle for market share and public opinion, the academic institutions freeze.
They simply don't know how to fight a street brawl.
And the most terrifying aspect of the resilience of this strategy is its portability. It is a plug-and-play system.
Once the PR firms and the think tanks realized how well it worked for tobacco, they didn't dismantle the machine. They just pointed it at new targets.
You literally see the exact same tactics and often the exact same people moving seamlessly from one public health crisis to the next over the course of 40 years.
To really grasp the scale of this, we need to walk through how this doubt machine was applied to three entirely different scientific crises: acid rain, the ozone hole, and secondhand smoke.
Let's start with acid rain. Set the stage for us. It's the late 70s and early 80s. What was happening?
In the 70s and 80s, scientists, particularly at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest in New Hampshire, noticed that rain and snow were becoming incredibly acidic, sometimes with the pH of lemon juice.
This acid rain was stripping nutrients from the soil, destroying forests, and killing off all the fish in hundreds of lakes across the northeast United States and Canada.
The science was clear. The cause was sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides being pumped into the atmosphere by coal-fired power plants in the Midwest.
The pollution would travel hundreds of miles on the wind and fall as acid rain.
The solution was obvious but expensive. Force the power plants to install chemical scrubbers in their smokestacks.
So an expensive regulation on a massive energy industry. Enter the doubt machine.
Precisely on cue. And here we see S. Fred Singer step into the spotlight again.
The Reagan administration, which was deeply hostile to environmental regulation, convened a panel through the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or the OSTP, to review the acid rain problem.
Singer, utilizing his credentials, got involved in the review process, and what he did was a masterclass in the linguistics of doubt.
The scientists on the panel had drafted a report that clearly linked the power plant emissions to the environmental damage and called for action.
Singer actually altered the executive summary of the report, the only part most politicians actually read, to soften the message.
He inserted language, emphasizing how much we didn't know. He highlighted the cost of the scrubbers.
He suggested that maybe local soils were naturally acidic, or that maybe we should just dump lime into the lakes to neutralize the acid rather than regulating the power plants.
He took a consensus scientific document and fundamentally shifted its tone from "we must act now" to "the science is too uncertain to justify the economic cost of regulation."
It's the exact same playbook. Emphasize uncertainty, propose distracting alternative theories, and delay the regulation. And it worked.
The U.S. delayed serious action on acid rain for a decade until a cap-and-trade system was finally implemented in the 1990s.
But while they were delaying action on acid rain, an even bigger crisis emerged: the ozone hole.
Yes. In the 1970s, two chemists, Sherwood Rowland and Mario Molina, discovered that a class of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, were highly stable in the lower atmosphere but would break apart when they reached the stratosphere, releasing chlorine.
That chlorine would then systematically destroy ozone molecules.
And for the listener, CFCs were everywhere. They were the propellants in aerosol hairspray, they were the refrigerants in your air conditioner and your refrigerator.
And the ozone layer is the only thing protecting life on Earth from being sterilized by ultraviolet radiation from the sun. So this was a civilization-ending threat.
It was. And when British scientists actually measured a massive physical hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica in the mid-1980s, proving Rowland and Molina perfectly correct, the chemical industry realized they were facing a global ban on CFCs.
So the think tanks and the credibility brokers deployed the doubt machine again. And the tactics here reached a level of sheer absurdity.
Fred Singer and others argued that the ozone hole wasn't caused by human-made CFCs, but by natural phenomena.
Right, the volcano argument, I remember reading this and thinking, how did anyone buy this?
They claimed that the chlorine destroying the ozone layer was actually coming from volcanic eruptions, specifically Mount Erebus in Antarctica, or from the evaporation of seawater.
Now, atmospheric chemists knew this was nonsense. The chlorine from volcanoes and seawater is soluble in water. It rains out of the lower atmosphere before it ever reaches the stratosphere.
CFCs are insoluble, which is exactly why they survive long enough to reach the ozone layer. Furthermore, the chemical isotopes in the stratosphere matched manufactured CFCs, not natural sources.
But again, the media balance trap strikes. The public hears one scientist say it's hairspray and another scientist say it's volcanoes, and they assume the science is completely unsettled.
Exactly. They also attack the severity of the threat. Singer argued that even if the ozone layer was depleting, the increase in UV radiation was minor, equivalent to just moving a few hundred miles closer to the equator.
He completely ignored the catastrophic effects on phytoplankton, agriculture, and the massive increase in skin cancer rates.
The goal wasn't to win the scientific argument. The goal was to stall the international phase-out of CFCs for as long as possible.
And as the world was finalizing the Montreal Protocol to ban CFCs, the machine pivoted again, this time back to its roots, tobacco.
But not just smoking. In the early 90s, the battle line moved to secondhand smoke.
The EPA had conducted a massive risk assessment and concluded that environmental tobacco smoke, secondhand smoke, was a Class A human carcinogen.
It was killing thousands of non-smokers a year, particularly the spouses and children of smokers.
This threatened the tobacco industry in a new way. If smoking hurt innocent bystanders, cities would ban smoking in offices, restaurants, and airplanes.
The social acceptability of smoking would collapse.
So the industry couldn't just argue about individual freedom anymore. They had to attack the EPA's science directly. And this is where they tried to literally rewrite the rules of epidemiology.
Explain what they did with the statistics here, because this is where the machinery gets incredibly insidious. They started demanding impossible standards of proof.
They attacked the statistical methodologies of the EPA. In epidemiology, when you study a population to see if a chemical causes cancer, you use confidence limits.
A 90% confidence limit is standard for many epidemiological studies, meaning there is a 90% probability that the observed link between the chemical and the cancer is not due to random chance.
The think tanks and industry advocates began loudly demanding that the EPA use 95% confidence limits for secondhand smoke.
Which sounds to a layman like they just want the science to be 5% more rigorous. We just want to be really sure.
But what does demanding that specific number actually do to a public health study?
It creates an almost insurmountable hurdle when dealing with dispersed environmental toxins. To achieve a 95% confidence limit on a toxin that kills a few thousand people across a massive population, you would need a sample size so astronomically huge and expensive that the study becomes impossible to conduct.
They were demanding a level of absolute mathematical proof that simply doesn't exist in standard environmental risk assessment.
They also attacked the idea of the linear dose response, right?
Yes. The standard assumption in cancer research is a linear dose response without a threshold. That means every single exposure to a carcinogen, no matter how small, carries some risk.
If you inhale a little smoke, you have a little risk.
The industry demanded that the EPA assume threshold effects. They argued that a certain amount of secondhand smoke is perfectly harmless and the body can easily process it, and therefore low-level exposure shouldn't be regulated at all.
They framed the EPA's standard cautious risk assessment as junk science or bad science.
They created an entire PR campaign around the term sound science, which is just brilliant Orwellian doublespeak.
Sound science just meant science that demands an impossible burden of proof before any regulation can occur.
And finally, they took all of these decades of experience, the decoy research from tobacco, the executive summary editing from acid rain, the alternative natural theories from the ozone hole, and the statistical goalpost moving from secondhand smoke, and they pointed the fully operational, perfectly refined machine directly at climate change.
From cancer by the carton to global warming, the playbook never changed. Emphasize uncertainty, sustain controversy, demand absolute proof, and treat delay as the ultimate victory.
To understand how this playbook is executed so flawlessly today, we have to reconnect the specific actions of these scientists to the larger nested systems operating in society.
This isn't just a few rogue physicists sitting in a room writing letters to the editor.
This doubt machinery plugs directly into the public relations industries and massive, incredibly well-funded think tanks.
Organizations like the George C. Marshall Institute, which originally pushed the Star Wars missile defense system during the Cold War, pivoted seamlessly in the 1990s to denying climate change.
You have the Heartland Institute, the Cato Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
These think tanks present themselves to the public and to the media as independent, nonpartisan, scholarly policy research centers.
They have impressive names. They publish glossy reports. But if you look at the documentary evidence, the curtain is pulled completely back.
During the massive state tobacco litigations in the late 90s, millions of pages of internal corporate documents were released through discovery.
One of them is a 1997 policy payments document from Philip Morris. It is a staggering piece of evidence.
It truly lays the system bare. That document shows hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing from a single tobacco company directly to these supposedly independent think tanks.
The Cato Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the Heartland Institute, they all received massive checks from Philip Morris.
And the internal corporate justification for these payments wasn't to study tobacco.
The payments were categorized under the guise of promoting individual liberties, regulatory issues, and sound science.
They funded the infrastructure of denial by wrapping it in the language of American freedom and scientific rigor.
And this plugs right into partisan identity structures. They turned environmental protection and public health into culture war issues.
If you believed in free markets, if you considered yourself a conservative, you were told by these think tanks that you had to reject climate science, because accepting the science meant accepting government control.
And the media attention markets, ever hungry for content and conflict, uncritically laundered these think tank talking points.
Booking their fellows as experts on cable news and feeding the manufactured doubt to the public day after day.
To conceptualize how massive and pervasive this systemic deception is, I want to use a brilliant, expansive metaphor from the authors of the book, the global banquet analogy.
It beautifully describes the political economy of externalized costs.
Imagine that industrial civilization has been eating at a gigantic, luxurious banquet for the last 150 years.
We have feasted on the energy stored in fossil fuels. We had coal for appetizers, oil for the main course, natural gas for dessert.
This feast has provided us with unprecedented economic growth, technological marvels, lifted millions out of poverty, and built the modern world.
It is arguably the best meal in human history.
It is. But there is no such thing as a free lunch. Now, at the end of the feast, a man in a white jacket has arrived at the table.
He is the waiter, and he is holding the bill.
The bill is acid rain. It's the hole in the ozone layer. It's the health costs of secondhand smoke.
And most massively, it is rising sea levels, extreme weather, and global climate change.
These are the externalized environmental costs of living the way we have since the Industrial Revolution.
The bill is due. So what does the system of manufactured uncertainty do in this scenario?
It is the organized, well-funded system of convincing the diners at the banquet to ignore the waiter.
When the waiter hands over the bill, the credibility brokers provide the diners with the arguments to haggle over whether the math on the bill is exactly correct.
They claim that the waiter is a fraud just trying to steal their money.
They insist that the restaurant next door is actually responsible for the mess.
Or they claim we never actually ate the food in the first place, and it's just a natural cycle of hunger and fullness.
Manufactured uncertainty allows us to sit at the table in comfortable denial,
avoiding the hard, incredibly expensive work of actually paying the price, cleaning up the kitchen, and changing how we do business.
And that brings us to the core mechanism of how we, the public, are manipulated.
We are actively, systematically trained to misread scientific uncertainty as scientific ignorance.
We are conditioned to interpret a highly coordinated, well-funded public relations strategy as spontaneous, grassroots disagreement among honest experts.
When we see two people arguing on television, one representing thousands of peer-reviewed scientists and the other representing a think tank funded by fossil fuels, we assume it's a fair fight.
We assume the truth must lie somewhere in the middle. We do not see the invisible infrastructure propping up one side.
Which leads us directly to the foundational question of our analysis today.
Yes, it does.
So looking at everything we've unpacked, the Plaza Hotel, the Cold War ideology, Ben Santer, the think tanks, I have to ask you, what is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis in perception is treating these disputes as honest scientific disagreement or neutral free speech in the marketplace of ideas, when the structural layer is incentive-driven uncertainty production designed to delay accountability. Surface interpretation focuses on minor uncertainties, systems analysis reveals organized credibility brokerage, amplification channels, and delay incentives as the machinery.
I want you to sit with that for a moment as you go about your week. You are not witnessing a debate.
You are witnessing the gears of a machine designed to stall human progress for the sake of quarterly profits and ideological purity.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. It's something the authors refer to as the title search concept, and it completely reframed how I think about my own relationship with expertise and how I process the news.
Think about how you navigate risk in your daily life.
When you buy a house, you don't go down to the county clerk's office and do your own title search to ensure there are no hidden liens or claims on the property.
You hire a licensed expert because the risk of catastrophic financial ruin is simply too high.
If you need a heart bypass, you don't read 3 medical blogs, watch a YouTube video, and decide to do your own science with a scalpel. You trust a cardiac surgeon.
You trust mechanics to fix the brace on the car you put your children in. You trust aeronautical engineers and pilots to fly the planes you board.
In almost every high-stakes area of our lives, we readily, gratefully trust trained, vetted experts because we acknowledge the limits of our own knowledge.
Why then, in the realm of incredibly complex planetary science, science that dictates the survival of our ecosystems, the stability of our coastal cities, and the health of our global economy, do we suddenly feel entitled or even obligated to do our own science based on a few magazine articles, a cable news segment, or internet claims funded by vested interests?
I want to challenge you to consider how you vet the invisible infrastructure of your own beliefs. Whose title searches are you trusting when you form your opinions?
Are you listening to the consensus of thousands of global experts whose life's work is relentlessly peer-reviewed?
Or are you listening to the slickly packaged doubt manufactured by credibility brokers protecting a system that benefits them at your expense?
It's your house. It's your planet. Make sure you know exactly who is actually running the title search.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.